Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Winning Drive podcast. I'm Reeta Hubbard, the NFL chick, co-host of the Glenn and Reeta Show on 105.7 The Fan, with my guy Cordell Woodland from Shaking It Up Sports and the Ravens reporter for 105.7 The Fan. And we know now the divisional round, Ravens will play the Houston Texans Saturday at 4:30 p.m. here in Baltimore at M&T Bank Stadium. But obviously, there were 5 other games that were played. So let's start with the Texans as they hosted the Cleveland Browns. And Cordell, I am a victim of just not allowing things to play out, because if you would have told me that the Texans were going to beat down the Browns the way that they did, I would have called you a liar. Okay. As a matter of fact, I was absolutely planning on the Browns to advance to get to Baltimore in the old versus new matchup. And not because I didn't trust CJ Stroud, who has been phenomenal. I felt like that there were some weaknesses that were going to be exposed by the Browns. And it had nothing to do with the first outing, because we talked about this before. Case Keenum was the quarterback when they played the Texans on Christmas Eve. Will Anderson also didn't play. So it wasn't like I thought that there was going to be a repeat. Oh, and by the way, Amari Cooper had those 265 yards, which, by the way, everybody, Cordell beat me down to the ground in fantasy football as a result of that game. Thank you, Amari Cooper.
Right.
By the way. Anyway, so it wasn't that. It wasn't like I felt like that was going to be a repeat, right? But I did feel like that Cleveland had a balance that I didn't think that the Houston Texans had. And boy, was I wrong about that.
Yeah, I think this was one of those toss-up games of the weekend for me. I felt like I could make an argument for a reason why I thought both teams could win.
Right.
And like you, I had all but kind of locked it up in my mind that the Browns were coming to Baltimore and we were going to get Joe versus Lamar, and it was just going to be a crazy week. But one of the things that I kept saying when I mentioned the Texans was obviously CJ Stroud and what he can do in that offense. But I mean, it was put on full display on Saturday. And one of the things we talked about the Texans defense and about how you can run on them and you really can't trust their defense. That was the one thing we definitely mentioned. And but the one thing that I did say about that Texans defense, though, is that they do get takeaways. And that's exactly what they got against Joe Flacco. The back-to-back pick sixes that they had against him. I mean, those were back-breaking plays at the time to go along with their offense, who was unstoppable all game. I mean, I didn't even know Myles Garrett played in the game. I thought Laramie Tunsil looked like the best left tackle in football in that game on Saturday. Look, obviously the Texans are the team coming to town now. This isn't going to be a cakewalk. I know everybody's going to look at there's a rookie quarterback coming in, and the fact that the Ravens beat them week 1. Look, I'm not sitting here trying to talk people out of picking the Ravens. I'm going to pick the Ravens. I mean, everybody should. But this isn't going to. They're here for a reason. They're here for a reason. And I look at this Texans team and I can't help but feel like I'm watching the old Texans teams with Deshaun Watson and those guys, the way that they used to throw the ball all around the field and have kind of like that air raid offense and 60-yard touchdowns and stuff like that. It looks eerily similar to the way that it did back then. So this is definitely going to be a team that puts a lot of pressure on this Ravens defense that has been vulnerable a little bit on the back end of the season. I had Jonas Schaefer on my show on Monday, and he made a good point that the Ravens defense down the stretch of the season relied on a lot of big plays, a lot of takeaways, a lot of losses of yardage plays, tackles for loss, sacks, what have you. But teams were able to move the ball on them. So I am curious to see how this looks, because as great as Mike Macdonald has been this year, I think he's been the best defensive coordinator in football this year. I think you can make the argument that the Texans offensive coordinator has been probably one of the best offensive coordinators in his own right. So we haven't seen many offensive coordinators come and play the Ravens and kind of not look lost. So I'm curious to see what that battle looks like. All in all, though, I mean, I don't expect the Texans defense to travel to Baltimore. Ultimately, that's why I will be picking the Ravens. I think the Ravens will be able to move the ball on them pretty easily for the most part. And if they take care of the ball, I just don't see how the Texans win. But offensively, they're a juggernaut right now. And CJ Stroud's playing with a ton of confidence. I think Nico Collins is a stud. And what's lost in the sauce is that they can run the ball. They've been able to run the ball when they want to. Devin Singletary is running the ball really well right now. He's great out of the backfield in the passing game. So I think obviously the matchup will be that offense versus this Ravens defense, because I think if the Ravens offense takes care of the ball, they'll be fine.
I agree with that. So, yeah, that one was a doozy, to say the least. Having two pick sixes back to back is just always going to be backbreaking, and it's very hard to overcome that, particularly with a guy like Joe Flacco, which no disrespect. Joe had a phenomenal season prior to that game with the Browns, but he can't really move around. And then the offensive play calling was questionable at best, in my opinion.
They went one dimensional. I mean,
it was very weird.
Quarterback out. You got to help him out. They went out there and just determined to throw the ball 60 times, and
it was unreal how there was zero balance in that game very early on, and then when it was out of hand, they decided to run. Just very weird. All right, next game that we saw from the AFC, Dolphins at Chiefs.
Yeah,
kind of went the way that we thought. The Dolphins they're a finesse team. In the playoffs, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, the teams that are in all kinds of weather are the teams that will last in that regard. Now, see, the Rams was a situation where they were very good a couple years ago, and then they just so happened to play in their own stadium. Same thing with the Bucks, right? So those types of they got things that happen in their favor. But when it comes to the AFC, in my opinion, the teams that are in the trenches, that are out there in bad weather and out there, all types of all four seasons, are the teams that typically last the most. And based on my theory, I don't think that I'm wrong. You had the Chiefs, you had the Bengals, the Chiefs, so here we are, the Chiefs in sub-freezing temperatures, and Miami just looked like that they were ready to go to Cancun. Or Cabo, whichever one you like to go to the best. Pick your poison. West Coast, Pacific, Atlantic, whatever part of Mexico you like, it doesn't matter. You was ready to go, and they didn't want to tackle nobody. And at some point, finally, somebody from the Chiefs, Rice, had a consistent catching day, a huge day, and that led to the Chiefs' victory over the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all figured that the Chiefs would win. In the back of my mind, I did give the Dolphins a shot. I even tweeted it, just because the Chiefs struggled to catch the ball all year. I mean, we saw them literally lose games due to them not being able to catch the ball down the stretch, and the Dolphins have been able to do that. And I thought the Dolphins would be more balanced. We talked about the Browns going one-dimensional. The Dolphins were as well, got literally nothing out of their run game in that game against the Chiefs. I mean, Raheem Mostert, 8 carries, 33 yards. Devon Achane, 6 carries, 9 yards. A lot of it was great tackling by the Chiefs. They did a really good job wrapping these guys up, sealing the edges, not letting them get off tackle. And Tua just he didn't, the game plan didn't help him. I think Mike McDaniels had an issue with the play calling as well in his own right, but Tua just seemed tense, didn't take any chances. He was content on checking it down, and I just didn't. It didn't feel like the Dolphins were there to win. They were there just because they had to be. The Chiefs, on the other hand, Patrick Mahomes, man, I mean, you could tell he did not want to lose that game. I mean, he was from the jump. Credit to Andy Reid and those guys. They put the ball in Mahomes' hands early and allowed him to throw the ball, and he did throw the ball really well in those conditions. Like you said, Rashee Rice came through in a big way, 8 catches, 130 yards and a touchdown. Travis Kelce, 7 catches, 71 yards. He's the one that had a couple of the drops in the game. I think he had about 2 or 3 drops in that game, but Pacheco, 24 carries for him, has a touchdown. I mean, they've got the formula. The defense is playing well. They look really good. They looked really good in that game. So that's another reminder of the playoffs started a whole new season, and
Absolutely.
until you get those dudes out, you can't sleep on them. They're champions for a reason, and you got to give them their respect. They looked really good on Saturday.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, and look, this is still the Super Bowl champions. So it is what it is. They're gonna find a way to try to break through. And so they did that. And I ain't gonna hold y'all to ain't it. Okay. So his 5th-year option has been exercised, but I don't if they give
I
him a
just
long,
don't
I
know
don't
what
see a
they
long
can
term.
do. I mean, what are your you in this day and age? You're like paying so that you don't have to restart, and I don't think we got to remember it was his first playoff game. I just think
For sure.
it's you got to be absolutely sure before you're ready to go back out there and start playing Russian roulette at quarterback again. He's good enough to keep, but I agree. I mean, he looked tense. He didn't look like himself.
He doesn't want to run, understandably so,
right,
because of the concussions that he had. Look, Tua is a little limited as far as I'm concerned. He can get you to a certain place, but I don't know if he can take you to the promised land. He's gonna have to show me. So there's that. On Monday night, we know that the game got moved from Sunday to Monday. Steelers and Bills and Josh Allstott Allen came back out doing this thing like he normally does, running around and hopefully that's quarterbacky enough for some people, but it is what it is. So won the game that I think that we all agree with. I just find it funny that they still gave up 17 points to the Steelers, same amount of points that the Ravens gave up with guys that just really weren't interested in playing football that day because they had already won the number 1 seed and they had nothing to play for at that point. So interesting part of kind of how that went because the Steelers did show up in the second half, just wasn't enough to overcome.
Yeah, I mean the better team won.
Yeah.
Got to a point to where Pittsburgh needed Mason Rudolph to actually make some throws, and that's where you knew they were in trouble.
Right.
They not an efficient day on the ground for Pittsburgh, and that's kind of been their calling card down the stretch. That 3-game win streak they went on to finish the season, they did it by running the football. Najee Harris specifically, only 37 yards on the ground for Najee. Jaylen Warren probably needed to be the main guy in that game as he was averaging almost 5 yards a carry. But yeah, Josh Allen, I mean, he is scary good when he's good. That's really what this tells me. 21 for 30, little over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Also had that rushing touchdown that you mentioned. He had 74 yards on the ground. I mean, he is so good. It's sickening. And I think that's why people get so frustrated with him when you see him have those off games where he's not taking care of the ball and he's just doing a lot of head scratching things. Like he's very hot and cold, but I'm gonna tell you, when you get good Josh Allen, good luck beating the Bills. That they are so dynamic because as good as Stephon Diggs is and as good as Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox are, like, they will spread the ball all over the field. We had 3 different guys catch touchdown passes in this game. Josh Allen does a really good job of getting all those guys involved, and he doesn't make it so that you can just take Stephon Diggs away and try to force him to throw it to everybody else. He will do it. And when you combine that with them running the ball as well as they have been as of late, James Cook averaging a little over 4 yards a carry in that game, it's good enough. The defense, I like their defense enough. They mentioned a stat during the game. Teams do not want to throw the ball down the field against Buffalo at all. So I like the Bills. They're a legit threat. I can't wait to see this matchup against the Chiefs.
Ironically, James Cook is the brother of Dalvin Cook, who is now with the Ravens. So interesting. Just an interesting tidbit. I have no idea how any of this is going to play out. But as we know, they will be playing the Chiefs at home this weekend. So that's going to be fun to watch. When we come back, let's flip the script and talk about the NFC games that we watched this weekend here on Winning Drive. All right, NFC playoffs happened this weekend. Yeah, man. NFC East went out sad, bro.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, the NFC East went out very, very sad. Let's start with the Cowboys.
Oh,
Thrashing Green Bay Packers. First 7 seed team since they started the 7 teams to advance to the divisional round. So congrats to the Green Bay Packers. I mean, I think that you thought that this was a matchup issue, but I did not see this. I did not see the Jordan Love show turning into what it did. Don't even know who these dudes were he was throwing to, man. I mean, it was just phenomenal. Dallas, once again, disappointing.
You can't trust them. You can't trust them to do anything but be who they are in January. Yep. This is what I live for. I live for Cowboys by any means. I mean, I love January because I know we're going to get some Cowboys comedy. It came earlier than I thought. It came earlier than I thought. They're undefeated at home. They're averaging close to 40 points a game at home. I mean, the Packers finished out the season hot, quietly. Nobody really talked a lot about the Packers because they kind of slid into the postseason. But some dudes offensively and really as a team, because defensively they played really well down the stretch as well. But Jordan Love has been out of this world to finish the season. And you mentioned those receivers. I mean, a lot of people don't know who these guys are. And Dontavian Wicks, nice touchdown grab by him. Romeo Doubs, it was a thorn in the Cowboys side all game. The Cowboys just don't have it. And I said this to one of my Cowboy friends.
Don't have it.
The issue isn't even the team. They can say what they want about Dak, and I poke fun at Dak and I poke fun at McCarthy and all those guys. I don't like to fall into the trap, especially this time of year, of putting every loss on the quarterback. Everything isn't just on the quarterback. It's so easy to do that. But I think the Cowboys seem to always have the most pressure on them than any other team in the NFL, no matter what the circumstances are. This is a team that hasn't won a Super Bowl since, 95? Yet they have the most pressure on them every year. That's because of Jerry Jones, and that's because of their fan base. They make these games feel 10 times more of a pressure situation than it should be. Playing in January is already pressure, but they just make it unbearable for these guys, and I think that's why they keep coming up small.
Yeah, I despise Jerry Jones. I don't even despise Cowboys fans the way that, you're from the DC area, so I understand. I completely understand.
Yeah.
Cowboys fans that I know that live in the Baltimore area are typically sensible people, and they know their team. They don't get overhyped. They know who the Cowboys are. I despise Jerry Jones. So anytime Jerry Jones gets out of the picture, then that's a good day for me. And so all the Dak MVP conversations quieted up a little bit after that game. Interesting enough. Next game we saw was, to me, the game of the week, which was the Rams and the Lions. The Lions advanced. One of the better storylines. Both teams, it was basically a QB swap. Both QBs came from each other's former team. Interesting enough, Matt Stafford gave Detroit their first playoff win in 50-something years, but on the other side. How about that, right? So that game was very fun. Puka Nacua is a guy that, man, they couldn't do anything. 32 years. My bad, Spencer. I just made that up, I guess. You know what? I completely forgot. Excuse me, Barry Sanders, for disrespecting y'all going to the NFC Championship that one year. I please, I humbly come to you apologizing about that, because I did. Look, I literally just watched Bye Bye Barry not too long ago, so you would think I would remember, right? But anyway, it's interesting to see how all that went with all the storylines that were wrapped around it and everything. And Puka Nacua, as great as the day that he had, and I knew that he would, nobody can stop Puka Nacua. I really felt that there were questionable situations from Sean McVay and decision making that essentially led to them losing that game. But a good game nonetheless, and congrats to the Lions.
Best game of the weekend. I agree. This is another game where I thought coaching kind of did their team in. Another young, great play caller. So a lot of these great play callers looking bad this past weekend, going away from the run early. I mean, Kyron Williams has been so good for the Rams all year when he's been healthy. To finish the game with only 13 carries, and most of those came in the second half. They were very one-dimensional in this game, and I get it. Stafford was hot. You want to put the ball in his hands and give Puka Nacua as many opportunities as you can, but you got to have some sort of balance on the road in these playoff situations. That's what the Lions do. They're a balanced team. 25 carries, 27 passes in this game, and they were good in both areas. I've tweeted it out. I still don't believe in Detroit. I'm sorry. I don't. I think that they are
and they're going to make it to the NFC Championship, I think.
They will. Off of matchups. And look, we'll talk about the Bucs in a second, but I think a lot of people were surprised about that Bucs team that we got. Now, how much of that was just them playing against a fractured team? And like I said, I thought that what would be the difference in that game would be that the Bucs are just playing together as opposed to the Eagles seem to be playing individually. That's what that looked like. So I am curious to see what it looks like next week when the Bucs go to Detroit and play a legit team. I think the Lions are good. I just don't think that they're good. And I mean, we could get to the NFC Championship game and it could get ugly if they have to go out to San Francisco. That's kind of my ceiling for them, but it's a great story for sure.
I absolutely agree. And look, I'm rooting for them to make it to the NFC Championship game. Hey, even the Super Bowl, even. Good luck to y'all. But if the Ravens somehow find their way in Vegas, I'm not going to root for you then. So there's that. And then the game that we were just talking about, the Buccaneers game against the Eagles. They go to go to Tampa. And it ended the way I think many of us thought. They were already out of gas, lost 5 of their last 6. And it was over. It literally felt like it was over. A.J. Brown did not play due to a knee injury. And they were saying, well, he could potentially be available for the divisional round if they advance. Hey, no, go ahead and make your plans. They're not going to advance, particularly without A.J. Brown. So, happened the way that we thought. And season is over for Philly, man. And you're curious to know how this affects their off season, if anybody's going to get fired as a result. But shout out to Tampa. Shout out to Baker Mayfield, who leaves Cleveland and get the playoff way before the Browns do. So interesting enough that that storyline and the football universe gave Baker his first playoff win in Tampa.
Baker is a prime example of what I talk about when I say teams have to be careful about deciding to move on from these quarterbacks. You got to be absolutely sure, because if you look at the Browns, I mean, they go move on from Baker and then they go and get Watson, and I mean, at a groundbreaking deal that pretty much resets the quarterback market to a degree, and it comes with a lot of controversy. You get a guy who's a shell of himself. He still hasn't gotten up to Deshaun Watson level of what we're used to seeing from him. And then Joe Flacco comes off the couch and has a better stretch than Deshaun Watson has had at all in Cleveland for the amount of money that they're paying him. And Baker's doing nothing but flourishing. And I thought Baker got a raw deal when Cleveland kind of made him the scapegoat. I'm happy to see him doing what he's doing in Tampa Bay. And the reality is that game could have been worse. They had about 4 drops in the first half. Evans himself had multiple drops himself. This game could have gotten really, really ugly. I don't think A.J. Brown would have made a difference in this game. If anything, he would have made it worse because we knew he would have had a hissy fit on the sideline. Dallas Goedert ends up having his own little moment on the sideline. I'm just so sick of the Eagles. I'm sick of them. They're just a fractured team that are divided, and I think it starts at the head coach. It would not surprise me if Sirianni is gone because he brings no culture. They were hot that first year. It was great. But now I think you're starting to see the true colors. Everybody wants to talk about Jalen Hurts and stuff. This is, again, I don't go straight to the quarterback when teams lose. I'm not saying Hurts played great, but he is not the reason that this team fell off a cliff. I think it's in its totality, and it starts at the top.
I am. And I also want to say this too. While I do think that there's been a small regression for Jalen Hurts. I do think coaching did him no help in terms of like in terms of getting him back on track to what he was doing last year. That defense is terrible.
Yep.
Okay. Bradbury is terrible. They don't get pass rush. They don't they can't cover anybody.
They can't tackle.
Can't tackle nobody. So while we're sitting here talking about this offense, what we really need to be having a conversation about is how far off this defense has fell. And shout out to Jason Kelsey. We obviously know the brother of Travis Kelsey, who has decided that he will retire and announced his retirement after the game. So those were the NFC games. And we will see what the divisional round gives us. I like to think, for me, I think that the wild card weekends, it played out the way it was supposed to. Like, in my opinion, Cordell, wild card weekend is never really a good game weekend because the teams that really kind of are just happy to be there always get exposed. Right. So the games aren't really that good. The divisional round, in my opinion, is when it gets spicy and starts to get better.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the matchups. Look at the matchups. I mean, Chiefs, Bills, you know what you're going to get out of that. Yep. Ravens, Texans is the one that people are thinking is probably going to be the snooze game of the weekend, maybe between that and Detroit and Tampa Bay. And maybe even Green Bay and San Francisco. That could get ugly as well. Who knows, unless Jordan Love continues to stay hot. But we got some intriguing matchups in the divisional rounds, and yeah, I really didn't have too many surprises in the wild card.
Yeah, same here. Okay, so there's 2 roster spots that open. Let's talk about that here on Win and Drive. So we had 2 roster spots that we see come up for the Ravens. And there's been a lot of talk in social media land about who those roster spots will go to. So let's break down process of elimination, Cordell, if we can. Dalvin Cook, which I do believe will play at some point. I mean, it's too much talk about him potentially being a part of this offense. And look, it could be just smoke and mirrors. It could be. But I think that Dalvin Cook is still a good football player that went to a bad situation. That's my opinion. You don't need to put him as a spot because technically he's on the practice squad and you can just elevate him from the practice squad. So he doesn't technically go as a roster spot per se, right? Because he could just be elevated. There are guys that are coming off of IR and they're designated to return. We know there's Ardarius Washington, the defensive back. Devin Duvernay also is back. And Mark Andrews, we know, is back. So let's start. And if I'm missing anybody, please let me know. But those are the 3 to me that immediately come to mind as a result of these 2 roster spots being open. So let's boil down process of elimination. Do you think that Mark Andrews will be available to even play divisional weekend?
I don't think so. Just based off of what we saw from him on Friday, he was, light jog, no real burst, not a long stretch of movement. He's going maybe about 3-4 yards down the field, making some of those catches. He wasn't doing too much. He broke a light sweat. So I don't think Mark will be the guy, at least right now. Duvernay is an intriguing one, especially with them letting go Treadwell. I would imagine that I think that means something positive for Zay Flowers, who hasn't been practicing in over a week. So that was, I thought, a good sign about his progression right now with his injuries. But I think it also maybe gives them the idea that Devin Duvernay is good to go. And if he is, you do wonder if he's going to take back over his return spots from Tylan Wallace. How is that going to go? We'll see. But then with Pepe going on the IR, now you have to figure out what your DB situation may end up being like, because Worley's out, Worley's gone. You now have Pepe out. So they can play around with some things. I don't think Mark will be the guy brought up. If it's my guess right now, it's probably going to be Duvernay. Like you mentioned, Dalvin Cook as well, who's on the practice squad. So he has a couple of elevations, but with Melvin Gordon already on the active roster, they're not going to have 4 active running backs.
So does one go down and one stay up? Well, what do you think?
Well, Gordon would have to get cut because he's out of
elevations. Yeah.
So with them not cutting Gordon with their recent moves, leads me to believe that there's probably not a good chance that we're going to see Dalvin Cook this week, because I feel like if that was going to be the case, they would have already gotten Gordon out to prepare for Cook. But I could be wrong. We'll see what happens. But they have a couple of different people that they can mix and match with, and I think it'll all be determined with how healthy some of these guys are as the week progresses. Harbs told us on Monday that there will be some guys that are day to day, so we'll see. I think as the week goes on, that'll probably determine the other spot. But I'm fairly confident that Devin Duvernay will probably be one of those spots.
So what do we think about Washington being the second spot?
Ardarius. I knew I was forgetting somebody. Ardarius. Yeah. So with Pepe going down, and like I mentioned, Worley, that would in my mind kind of think that Ardarius could be the guy to kind of come in. He's played the nickel. He was the starting nickel to start the year. I mean, and he's played some safety as well, so it allows them to still use that big nickel package that they love, where they have 3 safeties on the field at the same time. So I could definitely see Ardarius Washington, especially with the matchup that they have where they're going up against the Texas team that likes to spread you out, likes to throw the ball down the field. This is probably going to be a game where you want to have an extra DB out there. And look, you don't know how Marlon's going to be. Marlon, may not even make it through the game with some of the things that we've seen to this point this year with him and his health status, and Kyle as well. I think Kyle will be okay. He was moving well last week, so we'll see this week. But I think that at the DB position, they want to have some flexibility.
I agree with that. So it will be interesting to see how this goes. I agree with you. I don't think that Mark Andrews plays. I think that there's some optimism from the Ravens flock about him playing. I don't really feel like that we're in a position to see that happening at least for the divisional round. I think that maybe that's a possibility for if they advance to the AFC Championship game, but ultimately I just don't see that happening this week. And look, if that's the case, it'll be interesting how who they move around as a result if he does return, because then somebody's going to have to, move off of the active roster. So be interesting to see how this goes. We will be watching this as well. I would like to think that there'll be some information this week about who takes those 2 roster spots as we get closer to the divisional game on Saturday. On our next episode, we'll get prepared for the game on Saturday. We'll talk about the pros and cons of playing against the Houston Texans, as well as what our predictions are moving forward. Ravens start off with 8.5-point favorites. Don't love it. You know how I feel about big spreads, Cordell. Not a fan. So it will be interesting to see where this moves to as we go along during the week. So we want to thank you all for listening. From Cordell to me, this is Winning Drive.